Good evening and welcome to our webcast. My name is Steve Fox from Border City Financial, and we're back again for one of our fun webcasts to discover something else that I don't know much about, as is usually the case. And so tonight I have somebody that I am very confident knows a whole lot more about this than I do, even though I have some really basic working knowledge, because he's been doing it for a really long time. And actually I've got a little bit of information here to maybe make as an introduction to Larry Keating. Larry is president and CEO of NPC, where he invented and has brought to market his industry's first secure managed endpoint computing solution, which he'll explain. He's also founder and CEO of Keating Technologies, and since 1987, Keating has been Canada's leading branch outsourcing service to the high technology industry, bringing more than $1.5 billion in technology products and services to market. For 8 years, Larry served as a founding chairman of the Minister's Technology Advisory Group for the province of Ontario. He was also a member of the Chair's Advisory Council on e-Government, the first ambassador for privacy by design for the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, and served as a technical advisor to the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario for the Aboriginal Computer Literacy Program. Larry is currently a member of the Investment Industry Association of Canada's Cybersecurity Committee, and he's a speaker and writer and has been a top 10 technology industry newsmaker. Now, I wasn't aware of all of that necessarily. I just know Larry is a really nice guy. But apparently he's also really smart.
That is a disturbingly long bio. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is call marketing about that bio. That has it's making me sound really old too.
You know, well, you're not. But we have had some fun even leading up to this. Up to and including COVID haircuts, where he is clearly winning the race.
Yeah, I'm reliving my high school days.
Yeah, that's perfect. Anyway, I am Larry. I'm delighted to introduce you both live for those who are actually on the live webcast with us, and as we push this out onto social media and elsewhere afterwards. I'm delighted to have you on. You're clearly an expert in your field, and one of the key reasons why I was looking so much forward to having you on the webcast is because this is an area that is very easy for the average person to be very intimidated by. You know, we hear about a breach of security at some company here or there. We don't know whether we're affected. I got 2 notices in the last couple of weeks that there were hacks into companies where I had information, including personal information. And then you have to figure out, where do I go from here? And how do I protect this? How do I recover from this? What does it mean to me? And I think I'm...
Oh, you're pretty literate. I consider you computer literate and security literate.
Okay, so I'm somewhat literate, and I still don't know how to actually protect myself and my family from someone invading us, because the world has changed. You know, growing up as a kid, it was very different. If somebody needed some money, they would find a way to buy a gun illegally and walk into a bank and ask for cash. And clearly that doesn't way,
the honest way of robbing a bank.
Yeah, absolutely. So those things aren't happening anymore. The world has changed very dramatically, and you've been at the cutting edge of this. So if you could just take a couple of minutes and talk to us about sort of what your history is. How did you take an interest in this? How did you go down this path? And how did it lead you to where you are today?
Well, sure, Steve. Well, first, I want to thank you for hosting the session. I think it's an extraordinarily valuable thing you're doing for your clients, getting them educated on such a critical topic. Well, my history is long in this realm. I actually founded Keating Technologies, as you'd mentioned, way back in 1987. And our first products were in the security field. We were selling dial-up communication products, and those dial-up connectivity products needed to be secured. We were selling encrypting modems to the banks in 86 and 87 that were kind of leading edge. But Keating Technologies has been in business for all that time. It's done very well bringing technology to Canadians. It's an incredible team and an incredible effort over all those years. But just a little better than about a decade ago, I'd been doing some government advisory work, as that overly long bio had alluded to. I could see kind of a bit of a collision that was going to happen. Everything we were doing in society, everything that we are doing today is underpinned with technology, entertainment, education, our work, everything we do. If we want to go on a vacation now, the first thing we do is hit the internet, right? If we want to do banking, we get on our smartphone or we get on our computer. This was already very prevalent a decade ago. And I thought, what are smaller organizations and people going to do who are going to be under attack for the things that they do? Cybercrime is not new. It's taken on some new language in the last decade or so. But really, I've been in data security, which is what we used to call it. Now it's cybersecurity for a very long time. So I brought to market through my new company that's running right alongside of Keating Technologies and is a part of a larger company called CompuGen, NPC Data Guard. And what it does is it takes care of the whole process of securing computers and providing them as a service to professionals. So if you're in a smaller business where you don't have a large IT department and you need to be working on a secure computer, we provide it as a service. And it's worked out amazingly well. We have hundreds of companies and thousands of customers buy the product now, and an excellent track record, because this is really hard to do. This whole thing about securing a computer is not easy. The cyber criminals are very well resourced. They are very well organized. This is no longer the 15-year-old in the basement with the $800 computer wreaking havoc, although that still does occur. This is now organized crime and nation states. It's ad hoc groups of professional hackers that get together to mount incredible attacks, both large and small. So that company, NPC Data Guard, specializes in that. And I know folks that are on your podcast listening and watching today are both concerned about their home computers, and maybe they're running a small business and their business computers. And largely the advice we'll give here relates to all that.
Yeah, this would be crucial, probably for almost, well, I don't want to say everyone I know. I do know a couple of people that don't have cell phones and don't use computers, but that is by far the exception. The rule is that we're critically dependent on these things, and the dependency has only been growing and growing astronomically, especially during the last 5 or 6 months. So as we think about work from home, whether we're using our personal computer or work computer, as we head through this time when we're all focused on other types of threats, what's been happening in the cybersecurity world through this time of COVID, and has anything changed?
Well, without question, the threat has increased dramatically. Criminals love chaos, and they're taking full advantage of this disruption. There actually has been some cyber criminal organizations who have said, at this time, we won't attack medical facilities. We won't attack these certain types of facilities that are working on the problem, which is in some twisted kind of way a little bit noble. But overall, the threat level has just increased dramatically. There's been clear exploitation of the pandemic, everything from emails that look like they come from the World Health Organization to test results that are sent to people who are waiting for test results. They happen to hit those people because they send billions of scam emails every day. They will hit people who are actually waiting for results. And these are scam emails, and they click on the links. It infects their computer, doesn't give them the results, of course. And it's pretty bad. Cybercrime has been very, very successful. it really now it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And when the pandemic hit, certain forms of activity just jumped, you know, orders of magnitude. Um, Attacks on home computers obviously went up because the workforce moved home. And the types of attacks, the two most predominant ones that we see are what we call BEC, or business email compromise attacks. These are attacks where they send a virus, and that virus gets into your computer. They can read information in the background. They can read your files. They can copy credentials as you're typing them into your banking system. And they use that information to redirect payments that you may make. They use that information to penetrate financial accounts directly. That's kind of a silent but deadly attack. And then there's the ransomware that we hear a lot about, which is another type of malware or virus that gets into your computer from clicking on a link, or perhaps an infected document is sent to you that looks real, but you didn't know it came from the bad guys. You click on it, your computer gets locked with encryption. This is a way of scrambling the data on your computer against a password that you can't access the data any longer. It sometimes simply disables your computer. And a ransomware attack, as the term implies, it requires you to pay a ransom, which is a really bad idea, which we don't recommend at all, to unlock your computer. So during the pandemic, both BEC and ransomware have gone up, exponentially. Attacks right across the board are up, but those are the two that are doing the most damage to, especially individuals and small businesses.
This is one of those topics that I guess for a lot of people comes across kind of like the pandemic, right? You find out that there's this global pandemic that started somewhere, and through travel, it's suddenly flying around the planet. And I remember having a conversation with somebody, I think it was back in February or March, and they were like, "Yeah, we were thinking of traveling to France, but we heard this thing going on in like Italy, and I don't know, maybe we should or maybe we shouldn't go," because we didn't know anything about it. And this, I think, kind of gives the same sort of feeling, is like, well, I have to use a computer, but how do I even know what I'm supposed to be clicking on or not clicking on, or doing or not doing? It feels like, to me, like there's so much education in this process. And as I said to you before we started, do you go stand in the software aisle, in a technology store, and until somebody comes along and says, "Oh, you should buy this and buy this and buy this." How in the world do you even start to protect yourself from all of this?
Well, firstly, technology is a good thing. I mean, I give another talk on what 200 years of innovation has done for mankind. Everything from, inverting the, 20/80 rule of education, where more than 100 years ago, only 20% of the world's population had a meaningful education. Today, it's 80%. Child mortality, the amount of time we work. I know it feels like we work a lot, but in Canada, we have a 37.5-hour work week. At the turn of the 20th century, it was a 65-hour work week on average. And a lot of this is pinned to technology as it's evolved. It has improved our quality of life. It is a good thing. And I know it doesn't feel like that some days, because it sometimes turns our life a little bit upside down. But let's set that aside for a minute and talk about how it's come about. Technology is not like other things that we do. I've always made the analogy that if computers were like cars, okay, or sorry, cars were like computers. Let me reverse that. If cars were like computers, we'd all have to be an auto mechanic to drive one. In the computer industry, the way we've pushed it out, the way we've grown with it over the last 50 years, is it really has created the largest kind of do-it-yourself type of product in history. What other product do we buy and take home or take back to the office in our small business? And we have to do so many things to it to make it work properly. Load software and configure and attach and do all these things. So it's it's kind of a fact of what technology is, that we get all this work that we have to do, and it's very difficult to do it right. Your point is extremely well taken. Like I mentioned earlier, the cyber criminals are very well equipped, very organized, and very technical. So you're up against them. And that's hard to do when you run down to the computer store and bring the computer home and just start setting it up, and you're eager to get it going, and you haven't added any protection to it at all. Now, the world is changing of technology. We're going to what we call as a service models and cloud services you've heard about. Mm-hmm. And as a service models, you really just use the technology and pay for it. You don't, own it yourself and buy the software yourself. Those models are very, very promising in terms of delivering to consumers and small businesses technologies that don't immediately bring them big risk. And larger organizations are doing a better job all the time. I'm a strong advocate to use newer technology. And that's not just because I sell a lot of technology. Newer technology now in this day and age is more secure. We all loved Windows 7 because it was a good, stable operating system. And the Mac OS is in various versions, good, stable operating systems. The newer versions of both of those are more secure. So Win 10, by far, the most secure operating system out of the box that Microsoft has ever manufactured. So there's good hope on the horizon of what to do. But I think what you have to do is just focus on the basics. We're going to cover them here. The basic things to do to make sure that you're at least, locking the door before you go to bed at night, rather than just leaving the door unlocked and maybe even partially wide open, as that analogy might go.
So when we're thinking of, some of the practical, all day, everyday uses, like I totally agree with you. I've been able to, FaceTime or Skype or whatever with family and friends and people that I, otherwise probably wouldn't have the same kind of connectivity with, utilizing technology. And I don't feel particularly at risk by doing something like that. But we are continually bombarded with stuff because, people's lives are busy. You open up your email and 30 pieces comes in and you got to work your way through it. And I know that it's easy to get caught. It's that they've done it so well. It's done so smartly now that it's easy to get caught. So maybe you can give us some practical steps on, first of all, where are the significant risks and what can we do to try to avoid those risks?
Well, that's a big question. And I think what we're going to be able to do here is just kind of go over the top of it. I don't think we'll be able to dive too deep, but let me break it down into two pieces. What should we be concerned with? And then what can we do about it? Okay. We want to do so many things with technology, and we do so many things with technology. As I say, it's a good thing, but we sometimes, race to get everything working and get it done so quickly. We don't take those few minutes to do the basics. The kind of attacks that I worry about most are especially malware attacks or penetrations into a computer from the bad guys. They can steal banking credentials. They can leave malware or viruses on the systems that are really, really damaging and can give you no end of grief. You've got to be careful about your little bit of your whole environment too at home, not just the computer, but the Wi-Fi. We're gonna talk for a few minutes about that. But the kinds of attacks we should be worried about are emails that we're not expecting, being on websites that maybe aren't, the most credible places in terms of security. You might be in a news feed or a Facebook feed that takes you to another site, and you notice that it's not HTTPS, which stands for the security, or your web browser, may tell you that this is not a secure site. You kind of have to be really careful about that. But it's a don't click what you don't know world. That's really what it's come down to. when you get those 30 emails, you really have to take a moment. Don't race to open everything. And, curiosity killed the cat. Okay. So you have to be extremely careful. If there's any doubt, you pick up the phone and you call, right? If your bank has sent you something requesting any kind of personal information, that's a huge red flag. Banks don't do that. Okay. So, pick up the phone and call. But why don't we go through, if you'd like to, Steve, kind of my top 5 things.
Absolutely.
That I try to talk about in the various talks that I give, and I'm kind of going to give it to you at the home computer and the small business computer level, if you were, not to sound condescending to it, but to me, that's where I spend most of my time, because that's one of the most vulnerable areas. Something that's happened in cyber attack over the last few years is the cyber criminals have moved downstream. Okay, I know we hear a lot about the big attacks and the big breaches, the Equifax we heard about, and we'll hear about a bank being breached every rare occasion. We hear about those because they're newsworthy. We really, that's not the most common attack. The most common attack is the very small business and individuals. Now, in the last 8-10 months, a year, it's actually become the mid-market of business that is getting the most attacked, because the cyber criminals have gotten very, very organized, and they're going after kind of that mid tier of the market is what I've been observing. But don't be fooled, because you read about the CRA and the banks and the Equifaxes and the large automotive company that loses all the information. You're still vulnerable. Okay, so these 5 kind of basics that I'm going to give you, they're pointed at, well, anybody, even the large organizations, but they do them in a very sophisticated way. Okay, we're going to do that?
Absolutely.
Great. So the first one is awareness, what you're doing here. Okay, be aware there is a problem. We can't just buy technology and download apps and not give some thought to what risk it may put us at. So make sure that you're giving it some thought, that as you put your kids on technology, especially, you make sure you have good tools for them to use, good safe tools, that there are actually softwares you can buy that will help restrict the places they go if they're very young, which I strongly recommend. But be aware, go to trainings if you can. If you're running a small business, here's a plug, we actually have webinars that we do on safe computing for the small business, everywhere from Beck to ransomware, what to do about them. There, you can see them at npcdataguard.com/webinars. They're recorded. You can listen to them at your leisure, or you can join us live. They're open to everyone, and do things like that. That awareness is really, really critical. Don't click what you don't know, as I said, that's a key, and listen to your computer. If you're going to be aware, your computer's going to talk to you. Don't click past all those error messages because you're just confused or in a hurry. Those error messages may have really important information for you. So keep the awareness factor high. The second thing is keep your technology up to date. Okay. It's kind of heartbreaking for me when I get the calls, from businesses who say, we just had a ransomware attack that locked us up for 5 days and they took all our information. Can you help us out? We're in a lot of problem here. And I find out they're all working on 8-10-year-old computers with operating systems that are not even supported anymore. Like, that's not even worth looking into how it happened. There's just so many problems with that. We just focus on, getting them out of that pickle and getting them onto new technology like ours that'll be secure. You want a newer computer with a newer operating system. Make sure that you're patching, that you turn on that ability to update your software and your computer automatically. You shouldn't even be waiting anymore. You should be letting that happen. Use very strong anti-malware software. Okay. Like, the really, really good stuff is $50 a year. Okay. This is not a computer you can probably afford really good anti-malware software. I know there's still free anti-malware suites out there. I don't like any of them. Okay. Free is generally not good when you want to buy security. And even to the point that we've found what we call rogue security software vendors. These are guys who build what looks to be an anti-malware suite, an antivirus suite, and they're the bad guys.
Yikes.
So you download their apparent antivirus software, and they're actually the bad guys. You just invited the burglar to come in and sit in the living room. So you don't want to do that.
And you serve them coffee.
Yeah, yeah, you're giving them coffee and a nice fresh drink if they'd like it.
Yeah.
Use strong passwords in this technology area. Okay, 8-character passwords, no longer long enough. Just about any 8-character password can be broke anywhere from seconds to minutes to a couple hours if the thief has very poor computing capability. Okay, passwords should start at least 12 characters now. And we recommend something called passphrases. So put 4 words together that mean something to you that wouldn't normally be 4 words strung together, and it runs up about 20, 25 characters. Nobody's going to break that password in a couple centuries. Okay, so strong passwords are important. The other thing to do, the next step after keeping the computer and your software and your antivirus suite up to date, is to protect your home Wi-Fi. Okay, I'm going to make available to you here, Steve, a small slide deck, and in it, for your clients and your audience here, in it will be a list of about 8 things you can do to make sure your home Wi-Fi is secure. Okay, that you've got the right level of protection on it, WPA2, and you've turned off some features once you've used them, things like universal plug and play. Those kind of things, when they're turned on, are good and handy, and they help you get connected fast, but they can be vulnerabilities. So making sure that you configure your Wi-Fi is really, really important. The 4th thing is use secure cloud services, and especially if you're running a small business or a small business from home. If it's now a choice between using your own copy of accounting software that you have to keep up to date and manage and protect the data on your computer, or you could use a cloud service, use the cloud service. Now, you got to do some homework. Make sure you're using a credible vendor. Ask the questions or check their website about the level of security that they have. We're taking servers out of small offices literally weekly right now. Small offices had servers for a couple of things. They had maybe their CRM software on it, their finance software, and they stored files on it. Okay, well, now those things can all be done in the cloud. So your CRM and your financial software is in the cloud in a good, credible organization that has great security, more security than you could ever buy yourself. And the file share can be done in something like Office 365 for your small business. It's brilliant. We're going through right now, because of these as a service and cloud models, what I call the democratization of security and the democratization of productivity, because the same thing the big guys use, the banks and the insurance companies, the guys who have all the technology leverage, you can now buy a single seat of for $20 a month. And you just can't beat that. So look to cloud services, look to as a service models. They're very powerful in delivering to you technology you just get to use, and you don't have to worry about all that back end. But you got to be a good shopper to do it. You got to know where to go to buy, because you can get into folks who don't run a good business offering some service or some model that is not completely secured. Do some homework. The last thing, and the most important thing, is always have a good backup. Okay, if you talk to your best IT professionals in the world, right, they'll tell you great stories about how backup got them out of the most precarious situations imaginable. Backup has to be good. Again, I'm a proponent now of online backups in good backup services, because it takes the backup out of the environment. Heaven forbid if you ever had a fire or a theft or a flood and your backup is sitting right beside your computer. At that moment, you technically don't have a backup. So online backups are very, very good. you know, get over the idea you're going to have to pay for a little bit of this. Okay. These things can cost as much as $10 a month. I mean, to save all the pictures that you've shot in the last 20 years, right? Just went through a scenario with a friend of a very good friend who they had their backup of all their family pictures on one of these, you know, external drives. And they had put it away and not accessed it for a while. Well, those drives don't like that. And they plugged it in and it wouldn't read. And that was their backup because their computer had failed, and they go to the backup that hasn't been accessed in years. And guess what?
That's when the tears start.
Yeah. And so fortunately, and, you know, a couple of our more technical people were happy to help out when it was a family situation. They were able to extract the drive out and, you know, make it work outside of that device, and they got their data back. But that was just luck. Mm-hmm. Most of the time those drives fail, you're not getting data back off it unless you're going to pay a data recovery company, you know, $7,000-8,000 sometimes to recover it. That's a lot. Yeah, it's painful. Always have a good backup of everything you have. Okay, so awareness, keep your technology up to date, protect your home Wi-Fi, use good cloud services and as a service models, and always have a good backup of everything you do. Even if you go into the cloud and use something like 365, go and get a backup service to that. Have everything always in two places.
Yeah, this is absolutely crucial information, right? Yeah. For the average person, because I'm sure you know, probably way more than I do, but I've met lots of people who were in the tears mode, you know, where they lost a bunch of data, and it's usually very sentimental stuff. It's usually not financial stuff or whatever. It's, you know, the family pictures or, you know, whatever. I meet people who have been shooting pictures on the same camera, on the same card for years and have never stored it anywhere else. So this is absolutely critical information. And
sorry to interrupt, Steve, but
go ahead.
You know, that is what you see the most, because most financial documents can be replaced. But yeah, you have to be very careful about some critical documents that get stored on old drives and old computers that might be wills, you know, estate plans, all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. At a time where those are essential, you know, it's heartbreaking when people are going through maybe the loss of a parent and the last of a generation, and now the documents need to be accessed, and you know they're not properly stored and backed up. You know, that's a digital estate problem that really people need to pay a fair bit of attention to. But my heartbreak is not. And by the way, when I first started NPC, one of the first calls I got was from a lady who had taken the photographs of her daughter's wedding and had just moved to a new digital camera. And she had not figured out how to get the backup off properly. And fortunately, she ended up having also a good news story at the end of all of it. But it would have been much easier to hire a professional photographer to shoot it all, because the cost would have been smaller. But that whole sensitivity to it as you're doing things and what you're doing, have that good backup, you know, it is critical. But the one that really hurts a lot when I get these calls is a small business who have worked so hard to build their business. They could be in financial services, have a book of business of 300-400 clients, 4 or 5 people in the office. They have a break-in and the computers are stolen. And on one of the computers was the backup. They stole what was the sudo or the little server, and everything's gone. And I've seen businesses that did not survive a small event like that. We've seen, you know, small businesses who didn't properly protect with good patching and anti-malware, who all of a sudden everything locks up, and they want tens of thousands of dollars to unlock. They simply can't afford. So, you know, this is technology is a fact of our life in the 21st century. And, you know, the alarm I like to raise is that, yeah, it's good, it's productive. We've made that case here, but we have to put almost equal effort now into how we secure it, how we back it up, and how we work it.
Well, we're never going back to the way it was before.
No.
to turn this stuff off at this point in time is pretty much like selling everything and crawling into a cave somewhere. Yeah. So if you're going to communicate with anybody, if you're going to pay your bills, you're going to be using some form of technology, and it's never going back to the way it was. It's only going forward. You raised so many points. We're not going to cover them today. I wrote some notes down, and I'll ask you for some stuff that we can tack on to the replay of this when we post it on the internet. But one of them that kind of struck me because it is an issue that I have heard, maybe not quite so recently, but I would say that the average retail consumer has some inhibitions about the cloud. What is the cloud? Where is it? And is it safe? And in the process of us doing homework, you talked about Office 365. My understanding is that Microsoft spends $1 billion a year on security. Yeah, my budget's not quite that big, right? So. Really? Yeah. So do I feel comfortable about Microsoft storing my data? Yes, because they have way more resources than I do. But as you were talking about that, maybe you can just highlight very briefly for people who don't have a good understanding of what the cloud is, so that they can feel comfortable about whatever service they decide to subscribe to, so that they're not going to lose the stuff that's important to them.
Well, yeah, it's a great question, and a full half hour on a
yeah, sorry. Well, we have to have you back then.
Yeah, there you go. And I'll be happy to be back. But it's a great question. And it's an inevitable development of where we are in technology. No question, the cloud, has had to evolve. It did not start off, because of the data breaches we heard about and some of the issues that it had. It didn't come out of the gate the smoothest. But there's no question that, as you so well stated about Microsoft, companies realize that if they're going to gain the trust of their customers and the new customers they want, they have to have a sterling track record in security. And I had the opportunity to listen to a fellow from IBM who works on their worldwide cloud strategy, and in a small meeting. But remember the old style meetings where we used to actually go as real people and show up
and sit next to each other?
Yeah,
I remember.
He was talking about cloud security and the job that IBM have done in this area and the emphasis on it. And he said, 15 years ago, when we went into a large organization and talked about their data and what their strategy was for information, we talked about data warehouses. Like, it was so big, it was like huge. And if somebody brought up the idea of security, it was like, you're putting a damper on the whole thing. And today, it's the first design consideration.
Right.
When IBM goes into a new enterprise, a new opportunity, and is designing a big new system, the first thing they start talking about is, how are we going to secure this? How are we going to protect the company and the individuals who are involved from any kind of attack? So it's evolving rapidly, and it's made incredible strides. But, what you're doing in the cloud, is rather than your data being stored on your local computer and the computing happening in your local computer, you're logged into a computer somewhere else where all that's happening or being stored. That's all the cloud is. Facebook is the cloud. Okay. You've been working in the cloud if you've been on Facebook for how long? Okay. As you shift your work and other parts of your life to it, you just have to be aware that certain companies are eclipsing the capability of you to secure that information.
Clearly.
Okay? It's happening very, very rapidly. Look, NPC, our product, it's an as a service model that uses cloud backup. All right. We've had an incredibly good track record of protecting client data and protecting our users, because we build the computer for the customer at a very high level of security with our security tools, and then say, here, use it. Okay. I actually don't believe even in medium and larger organizations, you can compete with that because it's all we do. So that is what the cloud is really all about. And there's no question that in a few years from now, even though just a few years ago, even businesses still had a lot of concern about moving to the cloud, in just a few years from now, and I only mean 2 or 3, our comfort with the cloud is going to be as routine as just going out and buying a new cell phone, because I think we are going to overall get it right. Now, cyber threat is never going to go away. Okay, the system is too big, it's too complex, there's too many moving parts. We're never going to get to perfection in that area. That's why even though you move to the cloud and you use these services, you still have to do your homework to make sure it's a credible vendor, that it's the brand, or it's the message they can give you on how they've secured your information or the information you're proposing to put in their system. Okay, so it's a big subject. It's a very exciting one, and it's kind of good news on the horizon, because the more and more we move to these services that are better and better protected, I mean, I think the better off we're all going to be, and we're going to be pulling out less hair. I mean, it's not going to be that old drive that won't read because we got the family pictures. I'll give you an idea, one last idea. I was touring a data center of one of these very large vendors that we talk about, and I can't name it because I saw a lot of stuff that's part of the future. But one of the things I saw them doing, which I just thought was amazing, they had these racks and racks and racks of hard drives that were hosting all this data. And they can do something called a hot swap. So each one of these hard drives is replicated in another area, right? And they can just literally pull that hard drive out and everything's fine. Nothing's disrupted. And they put another hard drive in. No drive in that data center is older than 12 months.
Yikes.
It's just for the cost of drives and the value of their service.
Right.
It's just not worth it. So how would you like to have your data on a brand new hard drive every 12 months and stored in a whole bunch of different places and split up in different buildings? That's what the cloud can do for you. And that's what ultimately I think is going to help solve this problem of data loss and minimize the cyber threat.
And on top of that, we're supposed to back it up somewhere else.
Yes. Always 2 places. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even 365.
Yeah.
I mean, even the best. Always have your information in 2 places, because you just never know. It could be as innocent as you accidentally deleted the information in your active 365 your repository.
Right.
And you didn't realize what you did. Now they have actually 2 levels of recycle bin.
Right.
Okay. But you never know. And it's,
correct.
Just, I'm an old IT guy in that regard. Just have a good backup.
Yep, absolutely. I know we could go on and on and on, and I know we're quickly running out of time. And I would love to have you back at a future point in time, because it's a topic we could really start to dig into and go a little deeper. But one of the things that came up recently that I've had some questions about is what happened with CRA. And I think there's a lot of misinformation, because when we get stuff on our news feed, we tend to think hack, right? Like someone got into CRA and extracted all this data. Talk a little bit about what happened with that, because when people couldn't log into CRA because it was shut down, there's all of a sudden there's this potential to feel very insecure about, oh my goodness, somebody's got my social insurance number and my date of birth and everything else. Talk a little bit about what happened there.
Okay. Really, there was 2 levels of problem. Okay. The first one was there was some weakness in the design of that system, in my mind. Okay. The front end security should have prevented the second part I'm going to talk about, which is called credential stuffing. Okay. Now, we've just come through a once in 100-year event. And I actually think we have to tip our hat to the federal government, the provincial government, the municipalities. Overall in Canada, they've done a wonderful job protecting us. I think Canada's shone a little bit in that regard. And so there was a lot of things to do very, very quickly. And I guess in that haste, you can, maybe you're compromising a little bit in some places. And I think there was a little bit of weakness at the front end. But the real weakness was the people who used the service and were using the same password that they'd used in other places. Okay, so what happens is, let's say you have your username, which is your email address, and your password in LinkedIn. All right. And LinkedIn gets breached, which it did. And hundreds of millions of usernames and passwords were stolen. And you, as an individual, when you signed up for that CRA service, used the same login name, because that's your only name, and usually the email address you use, and the same password. Well, the thieves who stole the LinkedIn data will take that username and that password, and they'll try it on different systems. We call it credential stuffing. Okay, so this breach, if there was an 80-20 rule, 80% of it was the users who had used a password that they'd used somewhere else that had been stolen. And I believe the last count I heard, there was about 9,000 actual accounts affected and breached in one system and 11,000 in another, that kind of thing. But against, hundreds of thousands to millions of people who were in the databases. But for those people, it's a real situation, obviously. You never minimize it based on the percentages.
Not if it's you.
Not if it's you. It's 100% you.
Yeah. Right.
You're no portion of another person. It happened to you, and it's awful. But that's what happened there. It was credential stuffing, and I know the CRA have reacted well. I would have shut the system down too, and they have rebuilt around new levels of authentication. I believe they're going to use what we call two-factor authentication, or some folks call it multi-factor authentication, and that simply means you not only have your username and password, but some other form of confirming it's you. And that would be a text, which is not the best 2FA right now, because that can also be attacked. But some other way of confirming it's you other than just the password you're putting in, maybe a secondary set of questions kind of thing. So yeah, it's unfortunate. It's bad at this time because, like what happened with Zoom, I was so disappointed when, Zoom, started to get pummeled in the media for their security, because a good percentage of it was a red herring. The level of their encryption, which was not a standard encryption, was more than fine. All right, but we didn't hear that in the media. And like the CRA breach, it's very disturbing to me, because these are the times we don't need that extra aggravation. These are the times we need a little bit more comfort and security about things. So many people used Zoom as an example to connect with their families at a critical time when they couldn't go see them, couldn't visit them in the US. Kids were not coming back from school right away. There was quarantines everywhere. And then Zoom gets slammed in the media and people are afraid to use it. It just causes more anxiety. Now, there were legitimately some things in the Zoom situation that, Zoom needed to fix. They had left their lobby open. They had, they had not defaulted security on. Okay. And, they needed to fix that, which they did. All right. But it's really unfortunate, Steve, when these things happen, when we see the CRA breach, because it takes confidence out of the system, when, especially at a time like now when we don't need that.
When you mentioned two-factor authentication and said that text maybe isn't the most secure, what I'm finding in my software usage is that the second factor authentication is being used more and more as time goes by. That we're definitely headed more in that direction. But often you're offered multiple ways for that to happen, right? You can get something on your phone. They actually call. You can get an email. You can get a text. From your perspective, what would be the most secure way, if you have an option of which one to pick, that will keep you as safe as possible?
In combination, they're all pretty good. Whenever you have that second factor turned on, I wouldn't overthink it. The reference I made to an SMS texting attack. It's called a SIM swap, and it requires, some kind of breach or cooperation from somebody from inside a phone company. Okay, so it happens. It's not impossible, but it's a little bit obscure. So I don't want to deter anybody from using one of those features that's most convenient for them for something that's a little bit not as common as it might sound, or the media might make it sound. They all work pretty good. I wouldn't lean to email as fast as other forms of authentication, because if they're already sitting inside your computer, like if you've got, a keylogger, what we call a RAT, a remote access tool that's been put on your computer by the bad guys. So you're logging in and they can see your login name and password, and then you get the confirmation email into that system. They're getting, kind of into the whole thing. So there's trade-offs in them, but I would say for today, enable any one of them and do it with some confidence. Don't worry so much about the SMS attacks. For me, it's a little bit obscure. It's something you read in the tech journals more than anything.
I know we're already a little bit over time. I want to ask, you're very gracious to me. I want to ask one more question, and I want to go back to when you talked about passwords, because I actually sat in a session when we used to sit next to other people.
Yeah.
So this would be good. Yeah, maybe a couple of years ago, and it was someone who was quite familiar with cybercrime, and he actually recommended choosing a long phrase that you're very familiar with, and using like the first letter of each word. So you talked about using a long phrase. He talked about using one letter from each word in a phrase to create a long, strong password. In my industry, this is driving me crazy, because somebody says, oh, it has to be between 6 and 14 characters, and it has to have a capital, and it has to have a character, and it has to have this. And then every 3 months I have to change it to something else, and I can't use something that was similar to it, and I can't use one that I've used before. And and I have to keep track of all of these things. And I'm not alone. I know there are lots of people who are in the same circumstance. What we don't want to do is feel so frustrated that we become complacent and just say, that's it. I'm just going to use one, and I'm going to use it everywhere, because clearly that's a risk and a problem.
Yeah.
So, so when it comes to passwords, are there any tips or tricks other than what you gave us so far? Because I have had people ask me, well, there's places where I can subscribe to a service that hold all my passwords. I don't know whether that's a good idea or not. I have no idea. Do you want to comment on that briefly, and then we'll wrap up?
Yeah. So I'll deal with the last part first, and that's the online services. I'm not a huge fan of them. I mean, I think they have a little bit of ways to go to make me confident. I would store all of my passwords there. It's like, creating a little bit of a Fort Knox, hopefully, but it's got a lot of gold in it.
Yeah.
And they're doing a very good job. They are evolving rapidly. But let's just go back to simple passwords, okay? First, and I'm going to send you a link that you can share with your audience. That it was from a webinar we did, and it jumps you right to the 9-minute mark where I talk about passwords and how to handle them and what to do with them. So firstly, that first letter thing and all that, it's not as important as length. What matters now is length, okay? The cyber criminals doing what we call a brute force attack, okay, where they're trying each letter. Just have the computing power for any letter that you put in. Doesn't matter how complicated, and the symbols and the shifts and the control characters, anything you put in there that's like under 10 is not recommended, under 10 characters in length. And they're hard to type. It's like, yikes, right? I mean, where did I have the $sign, and
yeah.
And so
you're singing my song.
Yeah. So what matters is making it long, and that's hard, but it doesn't have to be as complex if it's real long. I'm going to give you a really, really secure password. This is centuries to break on the fastest secure supercomputers in the world. Camp, horse, umbrella, addle. Okay. So that's 4 words that wouldn't normally occur together.
Right.
All right. That runs in the 20 character plus range, maybe 25 characters. Camp, horse, umbrella, addle. Maybe it draws a picture for someone of a horse sitting by a campfire addlely with an umbrella over him. And that's how you'd remember it. And then what you do is for each service that you're going to put that, that base password in, change it up. Okay. So that your bank password may have another word in it that you remember that basic long string is adapted to the bank password, and the Facebook password has something else in it to customize it to Facebook login. Okay. So you create that very long, for you memorable but incredibly odd password string, but customize it for each site with enough characters that it's unique to that site.
Right.
That's about as simple and as best a recommendation as I can make right now. Now, there's a problem with that. Sometimes you go to create a bank password and they're not quite caught up. They're saying, use a 10-character password that is just letters and symbols and ups and downs. And I'm wanting to call the bank and say, hey, get into the 21st century, kids. I mean, really what you should be saying is no shorter than a 16-character password. And we don't care what you type. Just don't make it, I like Walt Disney World, which would be something that's easy to put into a table, put words together that wouldn't normally be together.
Okay.
Is that making sense, Steve?
Absolutely. And I said that was the last question. And then we have a question from the live audience, which I want to address. Is saving your passwords in Google safe?
Do you mean in your web browser or in Google itself?
I'm unsure exactly. They didn't extrapolate any farther.
We'll answer it both ways then.
Okay.
If you're talking about saving it in the web browser itself, okay, firstly, I'm a big fan of Microsoft's new browser, Edge. It's Chromium based. Chromium is, something that Google wrote and made in the public domain. So it's similar in compatibility to Chrome, but privacy controls and security are much better. Okay. And if you have a secure computer, if you've done a lot of the things we're talking about and you're very confident, then I'm okay in Edge storing the password. Okay. Not a great practice, but I know how inconvenient it can be. And if it's your bank password, don't. If it's your login to Facebook, don't worry about it so much, and make sure you have a secure computer and you're using a secure browser. Okay. Right. Now, if the question is about saving it in Google itself, all right, Google really, for me, has 2 levels of products. They have consumer grade products, and then they have business products. Some of their business products are actually very, very good. And the level of security and what they do there is comparable to the leaders. And if it's a consumer product, I wouldn't recommend. Like if you're talking about Gmail and stuff like that, no, I wouldn't recommend that as a place to store anything in that regard. There's different places in Google where you can turn features on that will save your passwords. And if it's a consumer level product, I don't recommend it.
You know what? This has been an incredible conversation for me personally, because it's just there's so much to learn and it's so insightful. Oh, absolutely. And like I said before we started, all we're going to do is just scratch the surface of it. Because there's so much out there and there's so much to learn. But I am so grateful for you taking time, for all of our live listeners and people who are going to view this afterwards. This information is crucial for all of us. It's great, and it's applicable to just about everybody universally. So, Larry, thank you so much for taking some of your time out to share your expertise with us. We hope that people can make good use of this and keep themselves and their families safe in a time where we don't we don't feel too safe about a whole lot of things. So thank you so much, and we would be delighted to have you back again sometime.
I'll be happy to come back, Stephen. Thank you, and good on you for doing this, for your clients, helping get that message out and protecting them. Must make you a great advisor when you're concerned not just with their financial health and welfare, but also their computing health and welfare. Good on you.
Well, thank you so much. I will touch base with you afterwards, because as we push this out onto social media and out onto the web, there are some really key things that you talked about that I'm going to want to include in that copy. So I will get in touch with you shortly.
To do that, Steve.
Perfect. Wonderful. So have a great night, and thank you for those of you who joined us live. We hope that you found this insightful and useful. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Have a great night. Take care. This is a follow-up to our webcast, which was live last Thursday evening with Larry Keating of NPC, and he promised to send along another some slides with some information, things that he sort of referred to during the webcast, and wanted to send some resources to follow up with. So that we could tack this on to the recorded version of what he did. So I'm just going to put this up on the screen.
Out of the tomb, heaven's light shone in the room. I was safe, I was safe. If nothing else is true, I can trust in you. You are my security. I'm in prison, but I'm free. Feed me with your wine and bread. Rescued from the devil's strand. Warming fire of love divine. I will watch the shadows shine. Shine. Starts to cry. I am safe. I am safe. If you happen to want to talk to Larry or Darren about their solutions, there's the contact information for them.
And we're so grateful again for Larry spending his time to go through all of this with us and provide this information. So hopefully you find this useful and helpful, and we'll talk again soon.